Quỳnh Anh xin kính chào quý khán giả của đài truyền hình SBTN Úc Châu. Kính thưa quý vị, cách đây khoảng 1 tiếng rưỡi đồng hồ giờ Đông Bộ Sydney, tổ chức Human Rights Watch đã đưa ra bản tường trình về nhân quyền tại Việt Nam. Và rất may mắn cho chúng tôi là khi cô Elaine Pearson, giám đốc của Human Rights Watch Australia, đã cho phép chúng tôi một cuộc phỏng vấn đặc biệt về tình trạng đàn áp dã man của công an tại Việt Nam. Hi Elaine, welcome to SBTN Australia.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yep, Elaine, as we know that last 1.5 hours ago, Human Rights Watch just released the report about police abuses in Vietnam. Could you please share with us the main concerns about the report?
Yes, this is a new report which looks at specific cases all across the country of deaths in custody and cases of police brutality in Vietnam. What we found is that there's, really this quite widespread pattern whereby young people, particularly men in their 20s or 30s, are picked up sometimes for cases of theft, sometimes just for minor traffic infringements, or sometimes it's a neighbourhood dispute. And they're taken to the police lockup, they're beaten quite terribly by the police, and many of these cases have actually resulted in death. In some cases, the police have tried to cover it up. They've claimed that it's a suicide or that the person has died from illness. But in fact, a lot of these people have been sort of very young, fit and healthy. And we've done this report basically looking at newspaper reports and accounts of these incidents of police violence. And what we've also found is that there hasn't really been much action against the police where these deaths have occurred. So you would hope that, where someone is actually beaten to death in custody, that the police officer responsible would be in prison for a long period of time. In some cases, we've seen police officers who've actually been promoted. In other cases, there's been sort of a slap on the wrist or a jail term of, say 18 months in prison. One of the cases that we, just to give one example, one of the cases that we documented was a young man who was imprisoned because he had allegedly stolen a cow. And he was taken to the police lockup. He was beaten for several hours. He was then taken to hospital. He died in hospital before his family could see him. And in that case, the police officer responsible, although they admitted that they had beaten this person, got a jail term of only 18 months. So we think this is really, a very serious problem in Vietnam. This is not a couple of cases of isolated incidents, but we've documented these cases in cities and across nearly all of the provinces of the country.
So what is the causes of the police abuses in Vietnam?
Well, in some cases, I think it's partly a lack of training. Police are often trying to get confessions out of the people, the suspects that they're interviewing. And so in a number of these cases, what we've noticed is that they've actually beaten the confessions out of people. So in some of the cases, we've noticed that people have even confessed to crimes that they haven't even committed. Later on, other evidence has come to light in these cases where we found that the people are actually innocent, but they've wanted to stop the beating from happening, so they've been prepared to say just about anything. I think part of it also happens largely because there's a lack of accountability for these crimes. So police know that there are no repercussions, and so basically they can behave in any way that they want to.
So the report contains the detailed information. So how did you do the research?
Well, it's very difficult for Human Rights Watch to do research in Vietnam because it's such a closed country. Usually, if we were doing this type of research, we would go out there, we would speak directly to victims and witnesses of these crimes. But in this case, what we actually did was we gathered newspaper accounts. Many of the newspaper accounts are actually in government-controlled media. We then cross-referenced this with other blogs, independent news sources, and we put together the information in the report. So we have, I think in the report, about 28 cases of deaths in custody over the past 4 years. And we also have, I think, about 16 cases of beatings that have been quite severe. And really, we think that this is just scratching the surface of what is actually happening. Part of the problem is because the media is so closed, it's very difficult to get concrete information about these cases that are happening.
So what are your recommendations to the government of Vietnam?
So our report makes a number of recommendations. Firstly, we think that there needs to be some kind of independent commission that provides oversight of the police so that the families of these victims can make complaints where their loved ones have been beaten in such cases or died in custody. But at the moment, there is no independent commission. One of the other recommendations, and this is a very practical thing that the government of Vietnam could do, is to install video cameras in each of the police lockups, so that there's just a bit more of a check in terms of power and what is actually happening on the ground. And then thirdly, I think we want, for all of the cases that are in this report, for all of these cases to be thoroughly investigated and the police officers involved to be prosecuted in a court.
Many critics would argue that when Vietnam is a member of TPP, it means Trans-Pacific Partnership, they would revert their hardliner regime, like go back to their own shell and continue to oppress the human rights in Vietnam. Could you share with us your opinion about that?
Well, yes, I think, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a real opportunity to put a number of issues on the table, not only in terms of trade, but also ensuring that all the countries actually sign up to sort of minimum protections in terms of human rights, in terms of labour rights. But I don't think that once countries, have joined the TPP, that means that they can simply go back to their old ways. I think it's really incumbent upon countries that have signed the TPP to really keep the pressure up, and particularly when, incidents like this have been reported on, to ensure that there is thorough investigation and that the government is held to account, and so that the perpetrators of these abuses are actually brought to justice.
So, would you like to see members of the TPP countries, such as the US, Canada, or Australia, to take harsh measurement and force Vietnam to change unconditionally its human rights, and to change unconditionally its human rights records before granting a place in TPP?
Well, yes, I think TPP is one of those opportunities where we have a bit of leverage over the Vietnam government. And clearly, simply organisations like Human Rights Watch reporting on these crimes isn't going to be enough to sort of bring the Vietnamese government to address these issues. The pressure really has to come also from foreign governments. And so I absolutely think that governments like the United States, Canada, Australia should be publicly raising concerns about these issues. I think they should also be calling for an investigation into cases of police brutality, deaths in custody, and also some of the broader issues around freedom of expression in Vietnam. I think part of the problem is there is such widespread censorship of the media that it's very difficult for people to be able to report on and to know exactly what is happening. And so I think, as some of the basic preconditions to joining the TPP would be ensuring that, these very serious, egregious cases of human rights violations are dealt with by the Vietnamese government. And so I think, one of the other ways in which they could address these issues is, one, to, I guess, condemn these issues when they take place, but also to do better monitoring of these abuses as they're occurring, and to inquire of the government, what action has been taken, for instance, to follow up with police officers who have committed these abuses. Governments like Australia are providing quite a bit of training to security forces. They're also providing rule of law training. So all of these are really important opportunities where they could ensure that these issues are actually addressed as part of the training, but also ensure that there is, sort of built-in benchmarks so that we're not simply propping up institutions that are committing abuses, but also holding these institutions to account.
Yeah. There are lots of conscience prisoners, such as Viet Cong, who is a songwriter, was arrested just because of his compassion to fight against China invasion of Spratly Island. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think the issue of political prisoners in Vietnam is, again, a very serious human rights concern for our organisation and for many governments that are concerned about the state of freedom of expression in the country. I think part of the problem is that the penal code has a number of provisions there that enable people to be imprisoned just for simple, peaceful acts of free expression. So organising a demonstration, handing out anti-government propaganda are considered crimes, punishable lengthy prison terms. So we know that there are many political prisoners in Vietnam who really shouldn't be in jail. These are people who have been government critics. In some cases, they're journalists, they're bloggers, but they're people who are really, trying to do their best to hold the government to account. We don't think those people should be in prison. And so it's really incumbent on the Vietnamese government to show if they're serious about freedom of expression, then they don't have anything to fear from these people. They should release them, and make sure that jail time is really reserved for those who are actually conducting criminal acts, acts of violence, acts of theft, and so on, but not simply for peaceful acts of free expression that are simply acts on the Vietnamese Penal Code.
So, Elaine, how can we raise the awareness of the Australian to human rights issues?
Well, I think it's important that these issues get exposure in the media here in Australia, and that these issues are not, simply covered by those who are already interested in Vietnam or following sort of Vietnamese social media. So I think one of the ways in which we try and do that is, to try and make people understand that I think for a lot of Australians, they see Vietnam as, a tourist holiday destination. They don't know about these problems, human rights problems that are affecting a lot of Vietnamese people. So I think it's really important that people try and educate themselves a bit. They can go to the Human Rights Watch website to get more information about these abuses. And also that, when they learn about these things, that they try and sort of raise concerns with members of parliament, senators, and try and get the Australian government to be a bit more proactive in addressing these issues.
Yep. So what is responses of the Vietnamese government to the report?
Well, the Vietnamese government hasn't met with Human Rights Watch to discuss the findings of our report, unfortunately. We did send them a letter where we had a bunch of questions which we wanted to ask, and we thought that this would really help to inform our research, to be able to publish also the response from the Vietnamese government. However, till now we've had no response whatsoever to the letter that we sent to them.
Right. So can you talk to us one of the example of the police abuses that you think it has impressed the community?
So one of the examples from the report, I think that was particularly egregious, was a case from last year where 6 young men were picked up by the police in relation to a murder of a motorbike taxi driver. These were young men aged between 22 to 27 years of age. They were picked up, they were beaten really horrifically, and they were basically interrogated. And even though they didn't know anything about the murder that had taken place, they were forced to confess to this murder. Now later it transpired that actually someone else had committed this murder. Someone voluntarily came forward. There was other evidence to suggest that that was the case. However, we still haven't seen a sort of thorough accounting in terms of the police being investigated and prosecuted for beatings, these fake confessions out of these 6 men. And so this is sort of, I think, quite an extreme example, but it just shows the miscarriage of justice that is occurring in Vietnam. And if that other evidence hadn't come to light, perhaps these people could be serving lengthy jail terms for a murder that they didn't commit.
Elaine, from the report, who is the victims of the police abuses?
So the victims were really quite a wide range of people in Vietnam. They tended to be, poor people, some as young as 11 years old. We had a number of cases of children who were actually abused by the police. We know of at least one case where someone with a disability, a mental disability, was picked up. In many cases, they're young men who had been picked up for traffic violations, not wearing a helmet on a motorbike. In other cases, they'd been involved in some kind of neighbourhood dispute. In some cases, the young men had argued back with police officers, and they felt that that was actually the reason why they were beaten so severely. In other cases, they hadn't argued back, but they were simply picked up for crimes, minor theft, for instance, stealing a piglet, stealing a cow. In other cases, it was police responding to domestic violence abuses. So really, I think the thing that the report shows is that this is really quite widespread. It's happening, not just in one localised area. It's not like there's one specific police unit that is behaving in this way. This is endemic, systematic, right across the country.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming here to provide us this useful and very precious information. On behalf of SBTN Australia, we would like to thank you for your hard work you're putting in, and we hope that we will see you in the future.
Thank you.